A labyrinth is a symbol of transformation. At its simplest level, it's the movement from one state to another through a spiral. And those movements and those transformations are happening to us, in us, all the time. We associate them with a form of spiritual awareness or spiritual transformation. And that's because the idea of working with the labyrinth is that we become aware that we're not the content of our consciousness. We use our consciousness as a tool.
Hello and welcome to Passion Harvest. I am Luisa, your host. Thank you so much for joining me wherever you are in the world right now. Our guest today is Diana Durham. She explores the labyrinth of life. Diana draws on nature to discover why our deeper identity is the root of renewal. She is a poet, author, and explorer in the field of consciousness. Her latest book is Coherent Self, Coherent Mind. This is her story, and this is her passion. Diana, welcome to Passion Harvest. I'm really excited to have you back on the show today.
Oh, thank you, Luisa. It's lovely to chat with you again across the miles.
Yes.
So I'm going to begin by just, my poetry book is called Labyrinth, but it doesn't have a picture of a labyrinth on the cover. It has a picture of water flowing. And, but of course, a labyrinth is a symbol of transformation. At its simplest level, it's the movement from one state to another through a spiral. And those movements and those transformations are happening to us, in us, all the time. And we associate them with a form of spiritual awareness or spiritual transformation. And that's because the idea of working with the labyrinth is that we become aware that we're not the content of our consciousness. We use our consciousness as a tool, and we move between, when you're on this side of the spiral, then you move to the other side. There are two different aspects to our consciousness all the time. We're moving around and around. And you could say that's the inner realm and the outer realm. And we're always moving between these two in our experience. And that's how we grow ourselves and how we grow awareness. And so the collection is called Labyrinth because it's named after a very long poem that is kind of looking at all of these things and also looking at the way the brain works, because the brain has two hemispheres, and it's now understood that each hemisphere attends to the world in a different way. And so that you literally, we're kind of thinking this way and we're thinking that way all the time, if we allow ourselves to. Simply put, we move between a kind of intuitive approach and a more intellectual and sort of informational approach. And we synthesize those two and come up with new ideas, new insights. And that our brain kind of echoes or mirrors a larger kind of spiritual identity of ourselves, because we have an inner self, we have an outer personality self. And when those two aspects are in relationship, that's when things really work well. We work well, and we also come up with really good ideas. So the poems in this collection are mostly are about America, because they were written while I was living in America, and I moved back from America 4 years ago, and I'm now in England. And it was also, so the movement I was looking at was a sort of journey from old England to New England, because we did live in New England on the East Coast of America. And so it was coming to terms, really. It was tracing me coming to terms with moving from this old world into the new world and figuring out what that was all about, and working with homesickness, and working with the kind of raw ingredients that I found there in America. And I sequenced the poems because weather's so much a part of things in New England, because you have really extreme seasons. You have snowy winters, you have quite a short spring, really, in terms of the English sort of spring. You have hot, sunny summers and lovely autumns, or fall, as it's called there, with sort of sharp blue skies, and the humidity is gone. But it's particularly sort of famous, of course, for its trees, the maple trees, that their leaves turn red, orange, yellow. And so I arranged the poems around that sequence. So they go from, I can't remember now, I think they begin with winter, spring, summer, and autumn. They follow that cycle. And the reason for that is because that relates to a slightly more complicated way of thinking about the creative process and the spiral of creation, which is drawn from some amazing insights that come from the Kabbalah and the Jewish mystical tradition of thinking about the tree of life, and the idea that of the four forces. And the four forces are symbolically called water, air, earth, fire, and they move in that sequence. Because you don't really know, does the fire start the cycle, or does the water start the cycle? Because they continually go round and around, and so winter would correspond, funnily enough, you might not think of it, as with the water, because it's sort of dormant stillness upon the face of the deep, sense of being mindful, coming still, drawing in. That's that part of the creative process when you sort of just, there's a seed, but nothing's happening very much yet. And then so water, then air, that symbolizes, that's the spring. Things are beginning to sprout, ideas. So in terms of creative process, ideas are beginning to sort of sprout in one's mind. I relate it to the process of writing. You could relate it to any process, but if you relate it to the process of writing, that's when a kind of intimation or something has grown into ideas, and something starting to kind of flow and run around in consciousness. And then it moves to the summer and the earth cycle. And the earth cycle is when forms appear. A form appears, flowers come up, vegetables grow, hopefully. And in terms of writing, I might have a draft by that time. Something might be in form on paper or on the computer screen. And then the interesting thing is at that point, is you want it to be, you sort of want to think that it's finished. You want to think that it's finished, which is so interesting psychologically for lots of reasons. So I'm sort of getting a bit caught out now between my gardening and seasons and creative analogies here. But so just staying with the cycle of the seasons. So so you've got your form, but then you have the fire cycle comes, and that's autumn, and that's the trees, the maple trees. They actually look like flames. They're orange and red and yellow, and that's when your fruit and so on, it really ripens, and it won't taste good until it's ripe, and that means it's finished, it's formed, and you can pick it off the tree and you can eat it. And then that's the end of the cycle, and then everything goes dormant, you start again. And with the analogy I use in writing is that you have to get that form finished, and that means it has to be fired, and that means you have to be able to see it differently, because by this time you've fallen rather in love with this form, and you're pretty sure it's just great and it's finished. But you might get, something might happen, like with me, you get negative feedback, well, or you don't get any feedback at all, because no one really is very interested in it, because it's not finished. And there's all sorts of wonderful analogies that we use, or metaphors we use, like half-baked. Oh, it's half-baked. It's a half-baked project, half-baked idea. It's a half-baked poem. Draft. It's a draft, actually. It's not really finished yet. And so half-baked, what's the other one? Oh, then there's the idea of working in the clay, isn't there? You sort of, you're working the clay to form something, but that clay pot won't work until you fire it, and then it's finished. So all of these metaphors are pointing this out to us. And my experience is that my consciousness has to shift. I have to like shift a little bit. I have to like go from that bit point where I started and come up to another level, and then I'll see what to do. I'll see where the poem needs little bits chipping off, or the meaning extruded, and I turn into it is a sort of impersonal. I'm not personally involved in the poem anymore. I'm seeing it from another level. But interestingly, I'm also connecting with the originating voice of it, because very often when I draft something, a false, like the fake voice will come in, the voice that wants to get away with cliches. You know, that's how I experience it, and I'm no longer trying to defend that in myself. I've become like the fire, and because I've become the fire, I can finish it. And so that's an interesting analogy, I think, to the way we grow as human beings, where we almost have to move from that level of sort of slightly self-involved stuff around whatever it might be, a project, a relationship. Well, those are fairly big areas, aren't they? And then you move to another level, and then you lose all the hooks, all the things that are sort of that you've created as resistance, and you've expanded. And the other thing that's very interesting about this, using this way of thinking about the creative process, is that it for anyone who doesn't feel, or for anyone for whom the idea of spirituality, being a spiritual being, seems a rather vague thing, when you think about it, right there, we're sort of connected to these invisible forces. The water, the air, the earth, the fire, they move through our own consciousness. We tap into this creative cycle. And also in the Kabbalah, there's the idea of the four being the consonants of the name of God. I can't remember what the Hebrew is, but the Yahweh, the name of God, Yahweh, the four consonants: Father, Mother, Son, Daughter, the family, a sequence again. Aspects of the name of God, right? They move in a cycle. And so we are creators. That is how the creator works. That is how God works. God, Mother, Father, Son, Daughter, works through this sequence of aspects all the time. So we're directly connected through our consciousness to the sort of forces of the universe, if you like, just like the seasons.
Oh my gosh, I just listening in awe. I love, gosh, you think so deeply and amazingly, but I love how you explain that and dive into it. And of course it relates to anything in life, how to move through life. Sometimes we think the seasons are never going to end and we feel stuck.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're really ready for it to end.
Absolutely. And I love also towards the end with the autumn and the fire season, when things start to come to fruition, or that in some way we need to, you recommend that this is what you do, you detach yourself
Well, I think it is a process. You find you become detached. Now, how you get there is a bit of a mystery, to be honest, isn't it? Sometimes it's through pain. It's through being cauterized.
Yes. Well, it began with passion, of course, something
Yes.
inspiration and passion and all these cycles and end up, I mean, there's never any end, but end up to some eventual goal that perhaps you had no conception of how it would end, what it would look like in its fruition.
Yeah.
And life, in essence, really, anything we do is a creative process. I mean, we're here, in my opinion, to be the full creative expression of who we've come here to be, and it's so individual.
And what's this brings me back actually now again, because we mentioned earlier the Grail story. How does this, because all of this symbolism, you know, the tree of life, the Jewish Kabbalah tradition, the Western mystery tradition, and the Grail, the Arthurian and Grail stories, which are ones, you know, I happen to know those quite well. But
I love your work on the Grail, the Holy Grail.
There's lots of other texts, but it's all blueprints. It's all operating instructions for the psyche, for us, for consciousness. So the Grail story, you see, you could say for all of us, and it doesn't quite, it's not just like one story over, that's it, but there kind of is one big story that happens, and then there's that kind of repeats lots over and over again, which is the first part of the story of the Grail, Percival, is finding out, the first part of our process is finding out, you know, we grow up as little children, we grow through the cycles of adolescence, young adulthood, etc. And we come into fuller and fuller consciousness and work through all sorts of things on the way. And so the first part of the story is we come to know that we're spiritual beings. We may not know it. We may have a theory about it, or it may, but we don't really know it, or we may just come upon it, have the experience. And that's the first half of the Grail story. Percival has an experience. I'll come back to that in a minute. And then the second half of the Grail story, and the second half of the next step after knowing that ourselves is, okay, so how does this work? And so this changes the way well, it actually doesn't really change it, but we become conscious of how that other half of the identity that we didn't know we had factors in creation. See, because it does. That's when we start moving in that spiral more consciously, because we move between the sort of inner, more intuitive source of wisdom and all the new input that's constantly coming to us from the outside world. And the pivotal scene in the Grail story is when Percival is sitting next to a wounded king in a great hall, and the door opens on one side of the hall, and a beautiful maiden comes in. She's holding the Grail chalice in her hands, and it brings light with it. And Percival is looking at it and wondering about it and enthralled by it, and wants to ask about who it's for, who does it serve, what's it doing then, all of that, what is it? And but he doesn't ask because he's been told previously in the story not to talk too much. So he doesn't find out about the Grail then, and he has to, and so then he goes off on more of his adventures. And later on in the story, we find out that the Grail chalice, serves a man that lives deeper in the castle, the Grail King. And the Grail King simply represents the inner part of ourselves, or God, or spirit, or source, or whatever we want to call that dimension of self. And the Grail represents our heart, our feeling realm. So that it's that moment when we we have an epiphany. We're not, you know, we're no longer quite so distracted or quite so threaded into the reaction and a marvelousness and awfulness and overwhelmingness of what we call the outer world, or the world of our circumstances. And we've connected to this amazing energy that's at the core of ourselves, which is the fire, actually, that we've connected to the fire. And that's the cup. See, the cup, our heart is filled with that. And then as it's filled with it, that fire, that flow, that golden substance flows over and comes back through our consciousness and spills out into the world. And we suddenly realize that we live in a wonderland, which is the world when it's lit up by that fire, which relates to that creative process, doesn't it? Coming back to the creative process and being able to see things clearly, I suppose. So that's why the Grail myth is so marvelous, because okay, so he sees this Grail, right, but he doesn't ask about it. So he hasn't finished. He has an experience. We have the experience, but we miss the meaning. We have an epiphany. Sometimes this just happens to us for no reason. We suddenly get filled with that energy, and it's like, wow. And then it moves on, and we might not have completely understood what it meant or what it was. But later, gradually, we'll come to reflect on it, and we'll come to understand consciously, not just viscerally, but consciously, we'll understand, oh, that's because I've got this inner self and I've got this outer self. And if I pay more attention and work with the design of the inner and the outer of my consciousness, my being, I'll integrate my thought process. Both things will be happening. And this is important, because if we don't do that, what happens is we end up with all those lumpy forms that don't work very well, right? I mean, there's lots of buildings like that, that aren't very well designed.
You just answered my next question.
Yeah.
No, I was going to ask, I mean, of course it relates to you, the poetry and the seasons and the labyrinth, the movement, but what if we're stuck in whatever metaphor that may be for the audience that's listening, what if we feel stuck and we don't like our environment, our choices, the seasons that we're in? How do we move through that labyrinth?
Well, that's a great question, actually. I mean, this is what it all comes down to, isn't it? These very fancy, sort of wonderful, symbolic expositions of our own consciousness. How do we handle circumstances? How do we? And the primary one is that you realize that we learn bit by bit that even though there's something we don't like the cold spring. I don't like this relationship. I don't like my body. I don't like my job. I'm broke, whatever it is. You've got circumstances. But the first step is always to have that epiphany, to reach for the feeling of connection to the fire. And the reason for that is that once we feel that, once we have a sense of that, it immediately changes the circumstance, simply because it changes how we're feeling. If it's really simple in a way, if you feel happy for no particular reason, everything around you will look and feel better. Even that job, even the weather, it won't bother you anymore, because all of those things, they're not really what bug us. What really bugs us is our own disconnect from our own power. That's really all it is. Now, then we might want to change those things. So yes, okay, well, we can do that because we've got a generative consciousness. So we come up with an idea. Well, I want to get a better job, or I want to, whatever it is. So now we're into law of attraction. We're into intention. So you think about something that you want. See this. So then the way through to it is the path the path that opens in consciousness. Because as we connect to our inner being, as we have little minor epiphanies, let's say that, not one great big epiphany, but a little epiphany, you get an idea. Oh, I'll do this. Oh, I'll go and phone someone up. And we bit by bit, we take a pathway that's there. Now that's bringing us back to the labyrinth, by the way. Let's go to the myth of it's a slightly different aspect to it, but let's go to the myth of the labyrinth, under Knossos in Crete, and Ariadne, and it's Theseus, isn't it? And Theseus goes into the labyrinth to find the Minotaur. He's going to kill the Minotaur, and Ariadne gives him a ball of string, and so that he won't get lost. And she says, "What?" When she ties it in, he unravels it as he goes through the labyrinth. Now, this labyrinth is also a maze, and there's a difference, right? Because a maze has dead ends. A maze you can get lost in, but a labyrinth only has one way in and one way out. So he's got the string, so he's going to be able to find his way through the maze. Now, that's a wonderful metaphor for our circumstances. How do we turn a maze with dead ends into a labyrinth? Well, we need the string. What's that string? Well, so sometimes I picture this. I picture, I use that symbol of the Vesica, the two circles. No, that's too complicated and everything. So I picture this as like when you feel the sense of epiphany between, let's say, your outer awareness and your inner awareness. You suddenly got an idea. Do you know, everyone has that experience. It's like
Yes.
you suddenly have oh, yeah, I know what I'll do. You have like a new insight. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have those all the time in little ways. And that's like a line drawn between your heart and your mind and your heart. The mind's wondering what to do, and then it comes up with something, and the heart says, yes, 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 there's an agreement. So they connect. So that's like a little step on that path, that string.
And it feels
so
good.
That you follow, that's it. It feels good. Yes, exactly. That's.
If it doesn't
right.
feel good, well,
If it doesn't,
reconsider.
Yes. Yes, it's so simple. It will feel good. Yes, it will. Yeah. So there's that other meaning of the heart, the Grail chalice. It's the guide. The heart is the guide through the maze stroke labyrinth. The heart and how something feels will guide you through to finding that thing that you want, to drawing it to you. Yeah. It's so simple. It's so simple.
But hard sometimes.
It's subtle. Well, it's subtle. It's subtle.
Yeah.
It's subtle. Yeah. Is it hard? Not really. No, not in the end. It isn't. No, it's not hard because it's just a little bit at a time. And when we know the connect, when we feel, you see, our fulfillment. Ultimately, yes, we have things. We want a nice house. We want relationships at work, whatever. We need all those things. They're completely valid. We should have them. But really, what really gives us joy is the feeling of connection to our source and the sense of expansion that comes from that. Yeah, I don't know if you can hear that thunder. It's just agreeing with me. That's what really makes us happy in the end. Because as soon as you get something that you want, it'll give you satisfaction, but you're ready to move on, You're ready to move on. Because we're expanding beings.
Yes, and in essence, true spirituality is just connection with self. It's always within.
That's all it is. That's all it is. Yes.
And it's just amazing and so incredibly creative how you explain all this. It's so beautiful. Would you like? Sorry.
It is. Yeah, I mean, consciousness is the most beautiful tool. It's the magic icon that's in all the myths. It's the powerful powerful tool that if you don't know how to use it, it will use you, you know. It will just be in reaction to life, to everything around you, until you take hold of it and use it as the magic tool that it is.
Oh, I love that. Would you like to read a piece or a part of your poem for the audience from your book?
Yeah, actually, let me read.
Whatever comes to you in consciousness, or whatever page you open, or.
Well, there's a poem called Philosopher's Stone, which, of course, the Philosopher's Stone is another one of those symbols. Which I think also is talking about this same quality of consciousness. Can you hear the hail? Is it coming through? No? Okay, good. Philosopher's Stone. You can't hear it? No. I've been turning over in my heart, like a smooth pebble in the corner of my pocket, the thing itself. It is not seen, but I can feel it, sure, whole, real, as river polished translucency. In the darkened anteroom or threshold, the thing itself, shining into the prism world, whose tumbled contents, cupboards and vistas, take on then this commonplace new marvel of stone. So that's speaking about this possibility when that sense in yourself, that sense of sort of interior, like a lodestone, comes through us, the anteroom of consciousness, sort of out of darkness. It's like, you know, there's nothing there really. Then the world becomes this commonplace. It takes on those qualities.
Thank you.
That's magic. That's what magic is.
Well, we are magic, I guess.
We are magic.
Essence. Oh gosh, Diana, it's been so wonderful to have you on the show. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the Passion Harvest audience that I haven't asked you today?
We're spiritual beings who are trained into the whole mystery of the universe. We know how to function in this world harmoniously. We can come up with ideas that make sense, that work, with solutions. We do this. I mean, lots of people do this. We all do it. But we can come up with those ideas rather than the half-formed, lumpy things, you know, that don't work very well. But it is a spiritual act. It comes out of listening to the intuitive as well as the intellectual. It comes out of feeling full and not feeling empty. So you're always trying to manipulate and force things into being. So what I'm trying to say is that spirituality is absolutely essential. It's the next step. Learning to use our consciousness properly. It isn't just like a nice idea. It's because we must learn to function powerfully and harmoniously, you know, in this larger whole. I think that's when we sometimes look back on certain great statesmen. They were mostly men, you know, there's now probably stateswomen as well. I think that was always the ones who really, you know, they weren't perfect human beings or anything, but they brought us through, you know, traumatic situations. They led us. That's spirituality. That's coming up. That's you know, taking it on and coming up. You have to be thinking in large ways. You can't just have some small narrow agenda. So that's what I'm sort of trying to. That's what I'm really interested in is that I think spirituality is learning how to use consciousness, learning who we are. That's the leading edge right now. That's it. And you know, the Grail myth says that you heal the king, you heal consciousness, you connect up with your deeper being, and you restore the wasteland. That's what does it. Anyway, thank you for giving me.
Nice way to end the show. Thank you so much, Diana. It really
Lovely
was
to see you.
So insightful, so insightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you like this episode, please do subscribe for weekly passionate, inspirational interviews.